The Democrat Party leadership can essentially be neatly split into two categories at this point. On one hand, you've got the empty vessels like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. They're not really ideologues. They don't have hard beliefs. They kind of just blow with the wind because they want to stay in power as long as possible. On the other hand, you have the liars, and Zohran Mamdani fits very well into the liar category this week when asked about 9/11, since that obviously happened in New York and that's where Mamdani's running. He said that the real victims were not the people who died in the planes or on the Twin Towers, but the Muslims, like his auntie who felt embarrassed when walking through the city after the tragedy.
I want to speak to the memory of my aunt, who stopped taking the subway after September 11th because she did not feel safe in her hijab.
So that's a horrible thing to say, obviously. No offense to your aunt, Mamdani, but I don't really care how she feels after 9/11. I care about what her religion did and what, Mamdani's religion did as well. In any case, people did some research into Zohran Mamdani's aunt. Turns out she's never worn a hijab. Like, that's not her thing. Turns out he made the whole thing up, which gives off Tim Walz vibes, by the way, like very similar to Tim Walz. You'll remember Tim Walz was allergic to telling the truth during his vice presidential candidacy. He would make up stories like fighting in combat or winning military awards or being the head coach of a football team. All lies, like pathological liar. And Zohran is the same. He does the same things. Someone asked him about this, asked him about his lie about his aunt, and he made up another lie to cover up the old one.
I was speaking about my aunt. I was speaking about Zerafui, my father's cousin, who sadly passed away a few years ago. And for the takeaway from my more than 10-minute address about Islamophobia in this race and in this city to be the question of my aunt tells you everything about Andrew Cuomo and his inability to reckon with a...
Okay, so now it's his dad's cousin. And I'm sure tomorrow it will be his mom's auntie's wife's dog. Scott Jennings over at CNN sounded off about the lies. Couldn't have said it better myself. Here's what he said.
I watched a chunk of it. I didn't hear any words for the victims of 9/11, but he found the real victim, his aunt.
Is he?
The victims of 9/11 were in the Twin Towers. Those were the victims.
Is the implication here that he has to answer for the terrorists who attacked 9/11?
No, I think if you're going to run for mayor of New York City, or have any position in New York City, and you're going to talk about 9/11 or invoke 9/11, you darn sure better start with the people who died in the Twin Towers.
It's really that simple. This is not hard, but for Zohran Mamdani, it is hard because he's a jihadist and he doesn't want to tell the truth about this. One of the big, I think, cover-ups of Zohran Mamdani, everyone is so busy talking about his socialism, which is absolutely, it's a sticking point and it's important, that we have forgotten that he is a radical Muslim and he largely supports the actions of those who hijacked the planes on 9/11. 100%. I'm sorry, I can't come to any other conclusion. When you look at what he said, he refuses to condemn Hamas. He refuses to condemn the phrase from the river to the sea, which is a genocidal phrase. And when you see the kinds of people he hangs out with and has endorsed in the past, it's impossible to believe otherwise. And just to show you, by the way, how this guy was raised, here are some writings that people just uncovered from his dad. So this is the guy who rose Mamdani. You can see in the yellow, his dad wrote, if you're just listening, I'll read it for you. He said, "We need to recognize the suicide bomber first and foremost as a category of soldier." Then at the bottom, he says, "Suicide bombing needs to be understood as a feature of modern political violence rather than stigmatized as a mark of barbarism." It is barbarism. I find this rich coming from, again, the group that is saying Israel is genociding people in Palestine. Israel is not using suicide bombers, please. And yet they support this crap. So again, this is the man who rose Zohran Mamdani, just to understand where he's coming from. And look, I don't believe personally that you have to be like your parents. I don't think you have to be connected to them. I believe you can be different, but nothing that Zohran Mamdani has done so far indicates to me that he believes otherwise than, what his dad taught at this point. Despite his refusal to condemn violent attacks, Mamdani recently decided to bring on the tears for some sympathy for the threats that he's been getting from, on his own life. Take a look.
I get threats on my life. On the people that I love. And I try not to talk about it. because the function of racism, as Toni Morrison said, is distraction. My focus has always been on making this a city that's affordable, on making this a city that every New Yorker sees themselves in.
So as someone who also gets death threats and cares about my family, I don't get joy out of seeing this. I think it's scary. I think it's sad for him. I don't think that he should get death threats despite all the horrible things I think he's going to do to New York. But I do have a hard time believing him. I don't think the tears are real. The feeling of those tears to me is that they're not genuine, because he's made it very clear that he's a visceral, he has this visceral hatred for many groups of people. Capitalists, Jews, our military. These are people that he has spoken out against in very hateful ways. He's openly supported terrorist organizations. So if you're going to live by political violence, maybe you'll fall for political violence. I'll pray for him that that doesn't happen, but I do think his tears are hypocritical, and I think people should call him out for it. Unfortunately, despite the lies and the narcissism, Mamdani has won the election at this point. We're a week away, but these are the most recent polls on the ground. By the way, a Cuomo account was celebrating this, so that just shows how bad it is. Mamdani's got 44%, up 10% on Andrew Cuomo, who's at 34%. And the reason why Cuomo and their team were celebrating is because he's up 9% from before, but okay, you went from a 19% deficit to a 10% deficit. 10% is not close enough, bro. If you were within 3 or 4%, then sure, that's a big win. They're not going to win. There's 0, 0, 0, less than 0% chance. I would not bet a single dollar. If you told me, Josh, you can bet $1 and we will give you $100 if Cuomo wins, I would not bet that dollar. It's not worth it to me because I know at this point Mamdani will win. It's just not going to go any other way. And it's no wonder, by the way, we've allowed exactly what Democrats have always wanted. We have imported foreign voters to vote for foreign peoples. I showed on the show last week a graph showing how most of the people voting for Mamdani right now are actually foreign born or had parents that were foreign born. Here, look at this graph. This is some new data we have. This is the white population in New York City. If you're just listening, in 1910, it was 98%. Today, it is 32%. That is astounding. You want to talk about minorities for a second? This has always ticked me off. We talk about minorities. White people in the world are one of the smallest minorities possible. There are not a lot of white people in the world. If you're talking about New York City, white people are now a small minority. If you're talking about California state, a lot of people don't know this. In California state, being white is a minority now. But of course, not treated under the same protections as minorities are. So just to give you an understanding of how this graph goes down, again, if you're just listening, pretty much mostly white until the 1960s, 70s. It goes from 77% to 52% in a decade. And from there, just tapers off completely. So understand this. The white population does not mean American born necessarily. Back in the 1910s, 20s, 30s, it included white immigrants. And why is that relevant? This is the most important thing. Because back in the early 1900s, we were allowing people to come to our country who could actually assimilate, who wanted to be a part of the United States and be American. You have people like the Irish, the Danish. They assimilated. They came here. They assimilated very quickly, in one generation. That's why New York didn't fall into ruin, despite there still being lots of immigrants there. And in the 1970s, we decided, probably because we felt some sort of stupid guilt for Vietnam or other things, and a lot of bad Democrat politicians as well, we decided that we should just take everyone. The Civil Rights Act went in and we just decided, you know what? We're a horrible racist country. We're awful. So we're just going to take in everybody. And since then, regardless of skin color, I don't care about that because I just don't care. We took in people who hated America. That's how it is. They wanted to change it rather than being changed, and they were too different to assimilate, and that's why New York is the way it is. That's why they're going to elect Zohran Mamdani. That's why just 24 years after 9/11, New Yorkers, get this through your head and understand, this is crazy. 24 years after 9/11, New Yorkers are going to vote in a radical Muslim to run their city. The progressive left is a cult. I talk all about it in my book, A New Cult. Go check it out right now, guys. I talk about some wild, wild stories that big tech censors. Fortunately, no one can censor my own book, so it's right there. Go check it out. The link is in the description below. Thank you so much for watching today's episode, everybody. Please like the episode so other great patriots like yourselves will see it. And if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, give it a rating so other people will see it there. And you can tune in every single weekday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show, or you can watch another video right here.